The discovery of a coffin is never good news. I've said that before. And it's because there are only two reasons why somebody would bury a coffin in the ground. So let me ask you, what are those two reasons? Go ahead and comment down below with your best guess. I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to do that. So the first reason is always death. And then the second one is sometimes people will bury things in the ground that they don't want other people to know about. Like if it's something illegal or shameful or dirty, and they think that by burying it in the ground, they can hide it forever. But in this particular case, neither of those options were true. This story comes from a man who was walking in the woods when he saw something very strange, something that he had never seen before. It was a coffin sitting deep in the woods, hidden under some logs. He said, "I've walked these woods hundreds of times and have never noticed it." And so he decided to go over to the coffin, which was quite large, and try to figure out what was going on here. There was no mistaking what this was. It was an actual real wooden coffin. It was obviously old, really old, because it had been eroded away by the weather, wind and rain and snow. All those natural elements that break things down over time, and yet it still had a fairly defined shape, which was strange. It didn't look like something that had just broken apart. It looked like something that was put together. Described the scene in detail, saying that the forest floor around the coffin had been cleared away. It's almost like it was purposely done so that the coffin could be placed there and then covered with dirt. So he started digging around the outside of the coffin to see if he could get it uncovered and find out exactly what was inside of it. And that's when he made another interesting discovery. There were several small rocks that had been placed along the edge of the coffin, kind of holding it in place. And next to those rocks, there was also a steel rod. He didn't know what it was at first, but he said it looked like a tool of some kind. So he took off the dirt and grime and realized that it was actually a nail. And not just any nail, it was a railway nail. Now, these are long and thin, and they're used for fastening railroad tracks to railroad ties. Now we have a coffin and a railway nail. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that whoever put this coffin here most likely died between 1905 and 1969. Why is that? Well, that's when they stopped using those types of nails in the railroad industry. So our mysterious man went back home, cleaned himself up, and then came back to the woods with a camera crew. And they spent several hours carefully digging around the coffin. But this was difficult because first of all it had been raining and the hole filled with water. Second of all, they were worried about what might be inside. So they didn't want to just stab at it with a shovel. They wanted to be careful. So they used their hands to slowly remove the dirt, and little by little, they got the coffin uncovered. This is where the story starts to take a very strange turn, because as they got the coffin uncovered, they discovered that it wasn't just resting on the ground, it was actually suspended above it. There were several logs that had been placed underneath. It's kind of like a makeshift platform that raised the coffin up a couple of feet off the ground. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, well, duh, they probably did that so that the coffin would be off the water, right? Well, maybe. But remember, there's a lot more water in the ground than there is above. If we look at a picture of the ground where the coffin was found, do you see anything unusual about it? How about now? What about now? That's right. There was standing water all around the coffin. So the fact that this coffin was raised up on logs tells us that it was put there deliberately. Somebody planned this out. Now, what I want you to do is pause the video here and try to come up with a theory to explain how a coffin ends up being buried in the woods in such a strange way. Is it something illegal? Is it shameful? Or is it something else? Maybe it's just random and there's no big meaning behind it. But whatever your theory is, go ahead and comment it down below. Of course, everybody wants to know what was inside the coffin. And even though the men in the video didn't know it at the time, the answer was something that nobody could have predicted. So after a while, they finally got the coffin completely out of the hole. And as they were doing that, they discovered that it had no lid. It had been missing for a very long time. However, this gave them a little bit of an advantage, because they were able to peer inside and see what was going on. All they saw was dirt. Now, if there was a body inside of the coffin, it should have decayed long ago. But the fact that they could see dirt told them that there was nothing inside. So they opened up the coffin. Remember, they were expecting to see a dead body, maybe bones, but instead, it was empty. There was literally nothing inside of it. The coffin was made out of wood, which makes sense, because if they were going to hide something in the ground, they wouldn't want to hide it in a metal box. But what did they put in it? Well, at this point, the guys who were uncovering the coffin decided to start digging around the area to see if they could find some clues. That's when they found something crazy, several more railway spikes. And it became obvious to them that these spikes had been driven into the ground with a sledgehammer. They weren't just placed there. Somebody stood over them and hit them with a lot of force. Now, why would they do that? Well, let's go back to the main question I asked at the beginning of this video. Why would somebody bury a coffin in the ground? Like I said, there are two possible answers. Either somebody died and was buried there, or somebody wanted to hide something. If this was a grave, then why would they put spikes in the ground? Graves don't have spikes, so that means that this was not a grave. This was something that was being hidden. So my question to you is, what is it about this story so far that seems a little bit odd to you? What doesn't make sense? Well, if they wanted to hide something, why did they put it in a coffin? It doesn't make any sense to hide something by putting it in a box. It's like hiding a gift by putting it in a bigger box. Not to mention, how do you get a large, heavy coffin deep in the woods? You can't carry it very far. You certainly couldn't roll it because there's no wheels. So at this point, the men who were investigating this mystery were confused. They were wondering if they were even on the right track. But then they discovered something amazing. It was a piece of paper sticking out of the corner of the coffin. They pulled it out and unfolded it and discovered some writing on it. And luckily, the writing hadn't degraded because it was sealed inside of a coffin. The men read the writing and found out that it said, "Time capsule," which explained everything. This wasn't a coffin. This was a time capsule. It wasn't meant to be buried forever. It was meant to be buried for a certain amount of time, like 25 years or 50 years, or maybe even 100 years, and then dug back up again. Of course, the men were disappointed that there was a dead body or a secret or some kind of treasure, but then they thought, well, hey, this is pretty cool in its own way. We just found a time capsule from the past. What kind of things might be inside of here? And so they opened it up and found a bunch of old items. For example, there was a newspaper from June 1938. There was a magazine from May of 1940. There was a metal detector, a pack of cigarettes, a metal lunchbox, and they even found a record player and some records. But what I want to know is this. What do you think is the strangest thing that they found in the time capsule? Do you think it was the metal detector, or the records, or something else? Let me know by commenting down below. What's amazing is that all of these items were perfectly preserved because they had been sealed inside of a wooden box. Imagine the condition that they would have been in if they weren't. All of these things would have decomposed. So in the end, the men felt that this was a very unique discovery, even though it wasn't exactly what they were expecting. And as for why the time capsule was buried in the first place, there was no answer to that. It was just a mystery that they couldn't solve. But it goes to show that sometimes things aren't what they appear to be. A coffin in the woods may not always be a sign of a dead body.